In the winter of 1897, when the Boston mountains wear frost like old lace and the pines make a sound that isn't quite wind, there was a cabin the mail riders learned to pass without looking. One door, two windows the color of unkind water, and a lock that answered to a single iron tooth the county came to call the one key. What you're about to hear isn't folklore stitched after the fact. It's numbers, names, notes in a ledger that smelled of lye and cold bacon grease. It's the kind of arithmetic small towns try not to show visitors. 7 letters sent, 3 posters torn down, 6 mothers who wouldn't touch coffee again. They said the brothers were feral. I don't know if that's a condition or a decision, but I do know a cabin that keeps a single key is a place that has already chosen what it wants. Before we step onto that porch, do what we do here. Tell me where you're watching from. And if this is your first night with us, subscribe, because the stories we pull from the cracks of this country don't stay quiet for long. We bring a lamp. We bring a notebook. We don't bring certainty. The county map called it a spur road, but it moved like a vein laid wrong, down along the crooked fork, over rock that remembers hooves and blood. The Goins boys, Hollis and Mather, built their cabin on a hump of shale with a view no one asked for. Folk said they were born wrong, raised worse, and lived on what the hills were willing to forgive. They trapped. They skinned. They said little in words and a lot in how they stared. The cabin had a way of pretending it was ordinary. A broom on the stoop. A line for washing, though no one remembers seeing clothes on it. An iron bell hung beside the door, rope cut short so you had to step close to make it speak. Inside, it was all pine and stain and quiet. But every quiet has its grain. There's ran toward the lock on the inside of the door, newer than the wood around it, burnished in places like a prayer you rub too often. That key, long, old-fashioned, teeth like a broken comb, fit everything they owned that wouldn't sit still. The front door, the trunk under the bed, the padlock on the cellar hatch outside, the box with stamps and names, and something else we'll talk about when the room is ready to hear it. One key. One intention. They didn't go into town much. When they did, they went together, the way sickness comes in a season. Hollis, the broad one with a scar where an ear should have been, carried a folded sheet of paper, and he'd tack it to a post gentle as a man pinning a corsage. House needs help, good wages, room provided, references kept. Below it, a handbill torn from a St. Louis paper promised factory work for stout young ladies with nimble fingers, but the address written over in pencil pointed not to any factory and not to St. Louis. It pointed up here. This is how a place like that advertises, not with music, not with color, but with the tired parts of the world. Laundry for a week. A room while you wait for the train that's late. A message to carry to a cousin you remember as kind. Small honest tasks are the bait. A locked promise is the hook. The first to go missing wasn't called missing at first. She was called brave, then late, then a worry someone folded small and put in a pocket to keep from crying. Her name was Naomi Hatch. Hair the color of sorghum when the light is wrong. She'd come from Van Buren to help an aunt through a lying-in and stayed on when the baby forgot how to breathe. The aunt had 2 younger boys and a sorrow that made the house heavy. So Naomi answered the posting. Wages paid every Saturday. She wore her good boots because the road had a reputation. She said she'd be back by Sunday dinner with a story about men who didn't know how to wash a pan. Sunday came. Dinner hardened on plates. Her aunt folded the tablecloth too carefully, the way you handle a sleeping infant you fear waking to bad news. Monday, the aunt went to the marshal. Tuesday, the marshal rode out, looked at the road, and decided the weather could talk to him just as well from indoors. Wednesday, the aunt went alone, and the country learned a new sound a mother can make when she sees the kind of ordinary that isn't. She came up on the cabin with her grief put up like hair under a kerchief. Hollis met her on the stoop. He was polite in the way men can be when they've committed to something impolite. We hired a girl, yes'm, he said. Didn't take to the work. Left by sunset. He opened the door wide so she could see there was nothing to see. A kettle. A chair. a Bible with the wet look of a thing that's never been read. The aunt noticed the rack of pegs by the door. 5 pegs. 4 hats. 1 peg that knew a weight not present. She noticed the iron bell, thick with finger smears that didn't belong to men who cured hides and never washed. Which way did she go? The aunt asked. Toward the fork, Mather said, coming out of shadow the way a bad thought does. He had the key looped on a leather thong, hanging at his chest like a relic. He touched it when he lied. You could watch his finger go to it like a man who's found a rosary bead that knows all his sins. The aunt walked the bank, calling her niece's name with a softness that made the trees lean in. She found a footprint that could have been Naomi's if Naomi had been walking backward. She found a ribbon, blue, caught in a bramble no taller than a lie. She took the ribbon home and put it in a cup and poured hot water over it and drank what color came loose. Some griefs insist on ceremony. 2 weeks later, a different notice appeared on the church door 2 towns over, written by a hand that had learned its letters in a field school and never forgot the lesson. Help wanted for winter. Woman preferred. Lonely house. Safe. Safe. That word can sell you the rope and the plank and the river between. This time it was a widow named Mercy Fielding, whose husband had gone under a landslide that didn't even have the decency to be dramatic. She had a boy with a cough and a girl who slept with her boots on. Mercy read the notice, folded it into her apron, and asked the grocer if the Goins boys paid in cash. He said he didn't know. He said it like a man who doesn't want to know more than the world is willing to share. Still, he kept looking at the boy, and the cough, and the price of flour on his own chalkboard. They keep to themselves, he settled on. But the money's good when it shows. Mercy left the children with a neighbor, took the road up, and was seen near the old sycamore by a peddler who heard a bell ring once and stop, like a throat deciding against a scream. By the time the neighbor decided to go fetch, the light was the kind that lies to you about distance, and the sound in the trees had changed from wind to something that uses wind for a mask. Sheriff Auden Pike, yes, the same name that haunts too many of our stories, liked order the way some men like tobacco. He showed up on a mule whose hips stuck out like secrets and made his report in a hand that never smudged. Visited the Goins residence, he wrote. No sign of the subject. Premises neat to the eye. Noted. 1 key looped at M. Goins's neck. Affixed to leather. Front door secured from inside. Windows shuttered. Bell rope shortened. Brothers answered calm. Smell of lie pervasive. That's how the first part of the ledger reads. Calm. Lie. Bell rope. A key that fit everything that could hurt you. He didn't write the part about the way the brothers stood, heels planted, shoulders a touch too still. He didn't write how the cabin had that special church-like smell some rooms carry when they've hosted a ritual more often than a meal. You want the hook? Here it is. Inside Sheriff Pike's thul bag lived a folded page torn from a St. Louis want-ad section. It had the Goins boys' address penciled in a hand he didn't recognize. On the back of that page was a list in a woman's letters, careful and certain. 3 names, crossed through once with a strong line. Naomi Hatch. Mercy Fielding. A third you'll meet when the road bends and won't unbend. He didn't find that list on his first visit. He found it on the second, when the 1 key wasn't where it wanted to be, and the bell rung itself. The second visit began with a lie the weather told, a clear morning that pretended not to notice the bruise-colored clouds stacking behind the ridge. Pike tied his mule to a post that had seen more knots than conversations and walked the last 20 yards so the cabin wouldn't hear him thinking. No smoke from the pipe. No scuff on the stoop. The bell hung like a dark fruit, the rope cut so short you had to lean your heartbeat into the door to touch it. He didn't. He put his ear to the wood and listened to the kind of quiet that has a job. Inside, a kettle settling, the tick of something cooling, the tiny breath of mice with better sense than men. Hollis opened when the sheriff knocked, face arranged into rural hospitality. Behind him, the room had changed by staying the same. Pegs now all full, 2 hats, 2 coats, a length of rope looped to look like a lasso, and a woman's shawl that should have been on a woman. "Found that down by the fork," Mather said from the shadow, as if he had rehearsed the line. Pike's eyes did the slow work. A new padlock on a small interior door that hadn't been there last time. Fresh lie tang under the pine, sharp enough to make your teeth feel clean against your will. On the table, a tin for stamps, open, with blank envelopes nested like white birds. The key on Mather's thong gleamed where his fingers had gone to it too often. "May I see the cellar?" Pike asked. "Nothing in it but the cold," Hollis said, and the corner of his mouth worked like a man trying to push a nail through with his tongue. The padlock answered for him, shiny, recently oiled, both brothers' eyes glancing toward it and away in the same breath. "Next time," Pike said, and watched disappointment flicker where relief should have lived. He stepped onto the stoop. That was when the bell rang itself. One clean note that came from up high but sounded like it rose from the floor. Not a breeze. The pines were holding still. Not a bird. Birds don't ring iron. The brothers didn't move. That was the truest thing they did. Pike bent and picked something from the crack between sill and jamb. A stiff hair ribbon, blue bled to grey, caught in pitch as if the door had tried to keep it. He pocketed it without looking at it, the way a man pockets a live match. He rode back with the key shape drawn behind his eyes and a plan that tasted like ash. Some locks are puzzles. Some are promises. This felt like both. There are origin stories people tell to make monsters polite. The Goins boys had two. One said their mother birthed them during a flood and they learned the taste of silt before milk. The other said their father kept them in a sod dugout 2 winters too long and they forgot the grammar of other people. Both were probably true for a while, and then not true enough. What mattered was the pact the hills whispered they made when the old woman died in a thaw that turned the road to gruel. They didn't carry her to the churchyard. They carried her to the shale shelf and laid her in a trench the size of a promise. "We keep the house," Mather said, voice as flat as a plate. "We keep it together." Hollis nodded like a man who only owned yes and no had gone sour. After that, they lived by 2 tools, the one key and the word safe. The key they wore, Mather by day, Hollis by night, so no dream could take it. The word they posted, spoke, stitched into sentences. Safe wages, safe lodging, safe return. Safe is a door you can paint on anything. The bell was an invention their mother left them, or maybe they left themselves. It didn't summon. It vetted. They'd ask visitors to ring it to be civil, make you step close, feel the iron, see the door swing just enough to smell warmth. If you stepped back, they smiled slow and talked about weather. If you leaned in, they noted your trust, your shape, the way your eyes moved when a lock clicked. Some nights they rang it with a rope tucked tight so only someone inside could have set it swinging. The hills learned that sound the way dogs learn their names. Their cabin had more order than most churches. Boots heel to toe. Knives wiped and oiled. Chairs placed exactly so, with the scrape half circle under each leg where a man always sets himself to rise. Only one thing in that room disobeyed symmetry. The interior door, padlocked high and low, the grain around the hardware blackened from oil and handling. A door that had learned to breathe against pressure. Folks called the brothers feral. It excused the wrong part of the story. Wild creatures take what they need, then leave the world alone. These two learned the world's manners and wore them like a disguise. They said "Monsieur." They paid tabs in coins that clinked honest. They put out a broom. Feral wasn't the word. Practiced was. When you look back through a county's paper, you don't find disappearances at first. You find interruptions. Letters that never arrived. Wedding lace still on layaway. A library book that stopped traveling. Then you notice the gap where a person would be, the clean shape of their absence like a place setting no one clears. The third name was Litha Moran, a schoolteacher whose handwriting could keep a child's attention. She'd come from Yellville with a trunk, a spine that didn't bend easy, and a habit of walking at dusk to make the day feel finished. She wrote her sister every Sunday. The last letter said only this: "I have been asked to read for a gentleman who keeps to himself. It will be good to be useful." The envelope bore a stamp but no cancel. It was found in a box in the Goines cabin later, asleep beside 24 others, all bearing different hands, different towns, the same fate. A ferryman at Auburn Ford saw Litha pass with a wrapped parcel and that excellent look some teachers wear, the one that says the world is a book we've only just opened. He took a dime and told her the water would be mean again by morning. "I don't stay past dark," he added. "Folks think it's superstition. It's just policy." She smiled at policy, thanked him, and stepped into the woods. By week's end, the school board found a substitute who didn't know the students' names. The board minutes call it temporary. The board minutes lie for a living. Pike rode the spur and dismounted at the old sycamore where the bell sometimes threw its voice. He found chalk marks at hand height on the door frame. 6 faint lines, the lowest at a child's reach, the highest at a woman's crown. Notches like a farmer keeps for rainfall, but cleaner, more deliberate. He found the nail holes where a picture had hung, square of brighter wood like a tooth too white in an old jaw. He found lye barrels with sticks for stirring that smelled of bone, not bacon. "Why so clean?" he asked the brothers, a question that fits any crime. "Mother liked a tidy room," Mather said. He touched the key. He always touched the key. Hollis watched Pike's eyes the way a trap watches a rabbit. The sheriff went home with nothing he could swear to and a list he could not stop hearing. Naomi. Mercy. Litha. He wrote the names on the inside of his hatband and wore them like a prayer no church would endorse. A pattern is a mirror you eventually admit to. Pike started collecting the scraps that hadn't been meant to meet. The St. Louis handbills with penciled over addresses, the identical phrasing in notices tacked in 3 towns a day's ride apart, the stamp box always heavy, never half used. He brought them to the judge, who had sons of his own and a dislike for being made a fool of by men who wore civility like a clean shirt. They signed a paper that said warrant across the top and rode up the spur with 4 men who could hold a line. Nobody whistled. Even the mule kept quiet. The brothers looked surprised with just their eyebrows when the law came through the door like it belonged there. Mather smiled a little, as if he had wondered what this uniform would look like up close. Hollis set a kettle on the back of the stove as if to honor their company. The key hung on its thong, centered on Mather's chest, a dark pendulum keeping time. "Keys," Pike said. "Just the one," Mather said, almost proud. "Easier to keep account." "Hand it." Mather did. Slow. The leather thong left a pale ring on his neck like a season that ended without telling anyone. Pike put the iron in his palm and felt how the metal had learned their heat. He tried it in the interior padlock. It turned the way a lie turns into a habit. He tried the lower lock. It yielded with a little sigh which sometimes makes when it's been asked to be strong too long. Inside the small room, order, again. A chair, plain and straight-backed, placed on board scrubbed so hard the grain had risen like ribs. An iron ring set into a joist near the floor, a fixture for tying animals, a thing a farmer might call practical. A shelf with a plate, a cup, a folded quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and lye, a smell that knows how to pretend it's kind. On the wall, pencil ticks marching in pairs, far apart, then closer still, until they were a hush of graphite at shoulder height. A clock without a face might have kept better time. "What's this for, then?" Pike asked, and let the silence try to answer. The men behind him shifted, boots uneasy. The brothers looked past the sheriff, past the ring, past the quilt, toward that strip of brighter wood where a picture had hung. Mather's hand went without consent toward the empty square, almost a comfort. "Storage," Hollis said. "Of what?" asked Pike. Hollis didn't have the next word in his pocket. Mather found one. "Worry," he said, and that was accidentally true. Pike closed the door gentle, the way you close a lid over something that has not entirely stopped moving, and turned the key twice. He put it in his coat as if a pocket could be a cell. "Cellar," he said. The brothers' faces did the opposite of blink. The cellar hatch out back had learned to look like nothing. It lay flush with earth, the padlock greased and dusted to match the boards, a scatter of rabbit pellets hiding in plain sight. Pike brushed it clean with his sleeve and felt the grain answer his palm like a held breath. He tried the one key. It slid home with the intimacy of long use. Smell comes first, always. Cold dirt, old iron, damp wood. And under that, something the lie had chased but not caught, the afterscent of living. The men lit 2 lamps and went down slow, steps that had memorized someone else's weight now learning theirs. The cellar wasn't deep. A man could stand with his hat on and not scrape. The walls were shored with oak. One corner held turnips in a bin that hadn't been rummaged. Another held a stack of split pine for a winter that had already happened. Against the far wall, a frame someone had made from bed slats and stubbornness, narrow, with a mattress stuffed too thin. Beside it, a second iron ring sunk in the beam, this one scuffed smooth where rope had worked. On the dirt, footprints that had been swept, and the sweep marks themselves, the giveaway of men who believe in erasing. Pike went to the small table and looked at the things arranged there like a lesson. A comb with 3 missing teeth, a church program from Yellville with a thumbprint turned to a brown shine, a tin soldier with a bent rifle, a pair of spectacles missing one lens. None of it proved a crime louder than a whisper. Together, it was a confession written in the alphabet of keeping. He found the box last, under the frame where dust had forgotten how to settle. The one key fit, of course. Inside lay the post that had built their trade. Handbills, neatly clipped, addresses rewritten in the same square hand, envelopes half-addressed, stamps in sheets. Under the paper, in a folded cloth, 3 tokens, a ribbon, blue into grey, a locket with nothing inside, a ring resized by squeezing, not cut. Pike set them out one by one and felt his jaw go hard in that particular way men's faces do when memory meets duty. Above them, on the yard, the bell moved though no wind should have had an opinion. The note came down the stairs like a visitor with cold feet. "Close it," Pike said, and one of the men obeyed in a hurry that turned the lamp smoky. Darkness flinched, then settled back where it had been living. When they came up, Mather watched Pike's hands more than his face. "We keep what's ours," he said, and for the first time the sheriff heard the way they meant it. Not brother and brother, but house and men, lock and key, pact and practice. Pike palmed the iron and thought, not anymore. Law works slow because it's meant to outlast stories. Fear works quick because it's meant to save you for the next minute. The county moved on both clocks at once. Word spread the way sound does in hollows. Men slept with boots on. Women set chairs under latches that didn't require chairs. Children learned the shape of a bell in their nightmares and woke knowing they hadn't seen one. In town, the judge signed more papers, search, seize, present. In kitchens, women signed no papers and made lists of names of girls they hadn't seen since the first snow. Pike posted 2 men at the cabin and rode to fetch help he trusted to obey their own eyes. A blacksmith with hands that had learned courtesy from iron, an old tracker who could read what a squirrel forgets, a preacher who had once been a tanner and knew what lie hides and what it can't. When they came back, the cabin was untouched and too tidy still. The guards swore they'd heard the bell once near midnight. "We didn't go in," one said, ashamed that he had been sensible. The sheriff found boot prints hid among the deer, the heels cut in a particular way, a man's frugality making his shoes last by changing their bite. 2 sets, angled different, converging on the spring where the ground talked even when men didn't. He followed them to the shale shelf that held their mother and passed it to a cleft in the rock where cold came up like an argument. The old tracker nodded to the dark. "They've got a hole," he said. "Every creature that means to stay finds one." You'd like the brothers to have been clumsy then, or sentimental, or divided in their courage. They weren't. They were the same practice they'd always been, now lit by other people's anger. Hollis kept to the ridges, using a rabbit's trick of sitting so still the world grew tired and looked somewhere else. Mather moved in wider arcs, testing the reach of the law, touching fence posts, leaving the sound of feet where a posse would like to think there were none. They were good at not being there when you arrived. Night made the woods honest. Every sound belonged to something. The men camped in a ring that pretended to be brave. Pike sat with his back to a stump and read the tiny ledger he had found wedged under the cabin's floorboard. A pocket notebook, old spotted with grease, lines as tidy as a coroner's list. Not names. Initials. Dates. A mark in the margin that might be a check, might be a prayer, might just be someone's tally of having done what they set out to do. There were more entries than the county was ready to carry. Tomorrow, Pike said to the notebook, to the men, to the dark, we go in the hole. The bell didn't ring. The pines made a sound like remembering. The cave slit was a mouth that had forgotten why mouths open. Breath came cold off it, smelling of wet stone and the old, careful lives of bats. The blacksmith cut a wedge from a fallen spruce and fashioned a torch quick and quiet. The old tracker spit once, to let the place know a man was entering. Inside, the passage narrowed to the measure of a shoulder, then widened to a room that had kept secrets so long it did not recognize them as such. Pike's torch painted the walls colorless. The light found a sleeping platform made of nailed crates, a heap of pelts with the fur turned inward, a rack for drying meat that had met smoke too recently, and a hook sunk too deep for convenience. On a shelf lay the rest of the One Key's kingdom, a small book of locks that matched the cabins, spares, perhaps, or trophies, wrapped in oiled cloth, a tin of graphite for the key's teeth, a second thong cut from the first, as if the key had been shared and then reclaimed. Pike opened the cloth and found, tucked flat beneath the locks, a folded paper in that square hand. It was a list, and this time, the names were whole. Naomi Hatch, Mercy Fielding, Litha Moran. 3 more after, and a space as if the writer had stood at the edge of a decision and stepped back. Next to each, a mark that wasn't quite a cross, wasn't quite a number. A tally of control, not of compassion. The tracker knelt and touched a print that hadn't learned to be old yet. One left heel's gone, he said. His walking hurt. That'll make him meaner. Which one? Pike asked. The one who touches the key without remembering he's doing it, the tracker said. He had watched men longer than he'd watched deer. They came back to the light as the afternoon found its tired posture. At the lip of the cave, a sound like iron scolding the air. The bell. The cabin's bell. Once, then silence. Pike felt the hair rise on his arms the way wheat stands when weather changes its mind. They're at the house, he said, and turned the men like a clock. The cabin stood as before, broom placed, pegs obedient, door closed with the suggestion of welcome. The bell rope was moving, stilled by the time they reached it. The latch was pulled from inside. The men looked to Pike. He looked at the hinge pins, bright. Someone had oiled them too recently. He nodded to the blacksmith, who nodded back and did what ironworkers do, made the hinge remember how to be weak. They lifted the door free like a lid. Inside, the brothers had made a new arrangement. The chair was turned toward the interior padlocked room. The quilt was folded on the table in a square too neat for any human rest. The stamp box closed. The envelopes vanished. On the floor between door and table, chalk dust and adrift, like erased words. On the hearth, 2 cups cooling, one bearing the lip line of a man who didn't drink hot things until they forgot they were hot. Close, the tracker said. Not here. Pike stood very still and let the room tell him what had been done. He heard it, the key in the lock, the latch set, the hinge oiled, the door removed, the bell rung, the rope cut shorter. He pictured the men moving like they had practiced this scene every night inside their heads. He pictured where they would stand to watch the law come through the wood. He pictured the sight line from the loft. He looked up. The loft was a crawl space more than a room, no ladder, just the kind of notches a boy would cut and a man would keep using out of spite. Pike didn't announce. He put his back to a beam, hands to the wall, and went up like a man whose knees still remembered being younger. The blacksmith followed, quiet because he had learned to put his weight where wood forgives. At the top, dust, a narrow slit for air that faced the sycamore, a musket laid across two rafters, primed, a bundle of a man who had decided not to be seen and failed by an inch. Hollis, eyes that didn't know how to give up, breath tight. The bent heel gave him away when he shifted. "Don't," Pike said, not unkind. Hollis did. He reached for a shape his mind loved more than his hand could find. Habit, key, packed. His fingers closed on nothing. Pike had it. That empty clutch broke something in the room all three men could hear. "Down," Pike said. Hollis came down angry and careful, a combination that makes animals dangerous and men foolish. Mather wasn't in the room when they reached it. The back door was closed with the kind of care a man uses when he doesn't want a single board to remember him leaving. They bound Hollis with the rope his own hand had tied other knots with. He didn't fight. He watched the key. He watched it like it were breath and a future and a mother all at once. "You got no proof," he said, voice thickened by the effort of accounting. Pike set the notebook and the box on the table and didn't have to open either. He turned to the interior room and unlocked it, because what you don't show becomes the story someone else tells. The men stood in the doorway and let their faces learn a new shape for anger. The preacher put his hand over the iron ring and closed his eyes like a man praying only for the strength not to lie about what he'd seen. Hollis's mouth moved around words that didn't arrive. "We kept them," he said finally, and the sentence fell apart right there. "Where?" Pike asked. Hollis stared at the square of bright wood where the picture had hung and then at the floor where the chalk had been. "Gone," he said. And he meant the women, and he meant his brother, and he meant 100 things a lawman can't write in a report. They locked Hollis in his own small room and posted a man with a shotgun and a hatred of bells. Pike took the key, the ledger, the tokens, and a coil of stubbornness, and set off for the shale shelf, because that was where the boys' vows lived, and vows always think they deserve an audience. The path to the shelf is not long and not kind. It runs under scrub that grabs at sleeves and over rock taught by winter to say no. Pike went first, the old tracker behind, the blacksmith holding quiet like a tool. The sun had decided to sit low and orange, and the hills smelled like a fire 10 miles away, the safe kind that clears without killing. At the shelf, the ground told the truth if you knew what to ask. A scattering of disturbed shale, too clean. A piece of rope cut with a blade that had seen too much oak. A smear of dark on stone at knee height. Not blood, not sap, something the lie had tried to argue with and lost. The tracker put his cheek to the ground and listened the way you only see in stories, and then he did something Pike had not expected. He laughed once, without humor. "He gone under," he said. "Cave below the shelf. There's a sink, masked." He let himself down. He figures he can wait like a tick till we scratch. "Back to the hole," Pike said. They went around and in, torches telling the old story of light teaching stone to confess. The passage breathed different. Air moves wrong when a man has just been there. The room showed them new arrangements, the lock's book gone, the graphite tin spilled, a pelt kicked into the damp, a circle drawn on the dirt with a stick, as if someone had tried to talk to himself in a language he'd learned as a boy. "Brother!" Pike called, not to be kind, to be clear. No answer. Something dripped in the far dark, the unmusical, repetitive kind that learns to be a clock if you let it. The tracker found the fresh smear on the wall where a shoulder had leaned too hard. "His inner branch," he said. "Tight as a bottle neck." Pike didn't go in. He Saturday. He could wait stubborn as any rock. He set the key in the lamplight and let it wink, a bait no animal would fall for, but a man might. Time moved the way a hurt dog does, on 3 legs, eager and suspicious. After an hour, a voice came like a man remembering how to speak with other people listening. "You don't know nothing," Mather said from the scene. Pike didn't answer. He adjusted the wick and watched the light settle. Another silence. Another inch of talk. "We didn't do what you think," Mather added. which in the Book of Men's Sentences is always the same as admission. We kept the house. That's what she told us. Keep it. Keep it safe. Who? Pike asked, not for court, for accuracy. Our mother, Mather said, and the air in the cave seemed to pull back, like it had heard the name of a weather pattern. She said the world takes if you let it. She said make it give. We made it give. Pike stood. Come out, he said. Bring what's left of you. Then softer, because there are times when the voice you choose matters more than the words, and show me where the girls are. The only sound was the drip, now a metronome. In some stories, men like Mather choose a final confrontation. In this one, he chose a direction the cave had been guarding for him and made himself gone in a way a lawman could neither follow nor forgive. A plunge, perhaps. A crawl toward an opening too tight for men who ate regular. The tracker swore once, a prayer shaped like the wrong word. Pike came out with one brother in a room and the other dissolved into geology. Sometimes justice is arithmetic. Sometimes it's geography. Sometimes it's weather. The county wanted bodies, because bodies let grief assume a posture. The hills offered tokens, because tokens are what men like the Goins brothers understood how to keep. Under the shale shelf, where the ground wept in small, efficient ways, they found a scatter that had forgotten its own arrangement, a shoe with a heel repaired by a hand that knew measure and mercy, a locket's chain, green as a river left too long to its own devices, 5 buttons from a dress that had been mended twice and could not argue one more time, a hairpin too plain to be a prize. The preacher said the words for people you can't name and people you can't find. He did not use the word rest. He used the word end. The old tracker took off his hat. The blacksmith wiped his eyes with a wrist that smelled of coal and soap. Pike stood very straight and held the key so tight it left a welt in his palm that lasted until spring. They put up stones with no names on them because names were broken at the root. Mothers came and pressed their hands to the rock like it could pass warmth back and they could go home with a different weather inside. The school board printed a notice in the paper about Litha that used the phrase in the Lord's keeping, and Litha's sister cut out that notice and burned it on her stove and took the ashes to the river on a windy day. Hollis sat in the county jail and stared at the door like a faithful dog might stare at a master who forgot how to come home. He didn't speak in paragraphs. He spoke in repairs. We kept the house, he said, again and again, as if that sentence could be planed and sanded until it became a cradle instead of a coffin. The judge let him say it in court, once, because the law is patient with sentences that prove themselves useless. There was no satisfying confession. There rarely is. Men who practice harm as a habit don't narrate it in ways that help the rest of us sleep. The ledger spoke. The token spoke. The ring in the joist spoke without needing God's help. The jury looked at their hands and found they were fists. The verdict wrote itself. The cabin stood with its door back on its hinges and its bell taken down. Children walked past it on a dare and didn't laugh afterward. The broom stayed propped, a final, stupid civility. Pike ordered the locks removed and melted, because sometimes you have to teach iron new uses. The blacksmith obliged and made 2 things from the ruin, a horseshoe he hung over his shop door and a small cross he carried in his pocket, not because he thought it would save him, but because he believed in the weight of reminders. What do you do with a house that learned the wrong prayers? Some towns turned such places into museums. This one chose a match. Not out of rage, exactly. Out of a desire to quit seeing a set of boards pretend to be innocent. They waited until a hard rain so the flames would not wander, and then they stood back and let the roof tell the sky everything it had held. When the bell heated, it sighed and then gave up, a sound like iron forgiving itself for what it had been asked to say. The rope charred with the very particular smell of hemp that has been touched by many hands. The interior door burned last and loudest, as if it can acquire pride from being in the wrong story. Mather remained gone. Sometimes someone swore they saw a man in the folds of the Boston Mountains who walked like he was equal parts careful and hurt. Sometimes a trapline went missing, and the prints beside it were human and not. The tracker would listen to these reports and say nothing, because not all mysteries are invitations. Pike chronicled the sightings in a neat hand in the back of the same notebook where the girl's initials slept, and then drew one line through them when winter killed a man unknown in a cave and the bats reclaimed silence. Hollis died in a room too clean and a bed too narrow, 3 winters later, with a chaplain who tried the soft words first and the harder ones when the soft ones failed. In the end, he said nothing useful. Some men don't let language in. The key wasn't there to see him off. It lived in Pike's desk, wrapped in that cloth that had once hidden the locks, heavy as a fact. The county healed the way the body does when the wound is deep, by making a scar that draws the surface into a new shape and makes where they ache. Mothers still counted their daughters twice at sundown. Men still walked the long way home rather than take the spur. The ferryman kept his policy and charged the same dime and added one sentence to his caution: "Don't ring bells that you didn't hang." Years will teach a story to sit, but this one still stands at the edge of the room. If you go up where the ridge leans over the crooked fork at dusk and you listen the way guilt listens, you can almost hear a note that has nothing to do with wind. It's faint and not proud. It doesn't brag like legends. It doesn't declare itself. It just rings once, as if asking if you've learned anything since 1897. What happened in that cabin wasn't a haunting. It was a habit. Not supernatural. Super practiced. A key worn warm, a bell cut short, a word, safe, used as a trap. The county wanted a monster in the woods. What it had was 2 men and a set of decisions that fit their hands too well. You'll ask, how many? The ledger suggests more than the papers admitted and fewer than the nightmares say. Naomi, Mercy, Litha. Others we could guess at by the keeps they had the arrogance to keep. The body count matters, but the math that matters more is this: 1 key that fit too many things, 1 vow taken at a grave, 1 county that learned to mistrust its own doorways. If you walked with us from the stoop to the cellar to the shale shelf and back again, you know the shape of the lesson. Don't ring someone else's bell just because they tell you it's polite. Don't trust a word hung in a window when the room behind it won't show you its hands. And don't mistake tidy for kind. Lie can make anything look innocent for a minute. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if this is your first time here, subscribe, because the ledgers we read still have blank lines, and the next story is already scratching at the edge of the map. Leave a like if you want more long-form dives into the Macabre Corner's official history chooses to misfile. And answer me this: was the 1 key a tool, a symbol, or an excuse? In a world full of doors, how many do you let other people lock? Reality is colder than fiction. Don't miss what's next.